Hello students, this is lesson 4 for the chapter Cell, the Unit of Life, and today's topic is cell membrane. So cell membrane, it is a part of the cell and it is present almost in every types of cell. That is, every prokaryotic as well as a eukaryotic cell is enclosed by a thin covering which is called as the cell membrane. And there are some other names of the cell membrane. So that is the plasma membrane or plasma lemma. Let's follow the NCERT textbook to know about the discovery of this particular membrane. So the detailed structure of the membrane was studied only after the advent of the electron microscope in the 1950s. So it was only after 1950s when the electron microscope that was invented, because the light microscope, it cannot resolve, it do not have the resolving power to distinguish the cell membrane. So this cell membrane, it is a distinct organelle rather than just an outer covering for a cell. The cell membrane, it is a semi-permeable or selectively permeable layer, as it allows only certain substances to enter or leave the cell through it. As for the nature of the cell membrane, then it is elastic in nature and can restore the former position after being pulled, and it can also undergo renewal and can repair after minor injuries. So meanwhile, this whole structure, it was in study. The chemical studies on the cell membrane, it was also going on, and especially in human red blood cells, enabled the scientists to deduce the possible structure of the plasma membrane. As to what chemicals or the biomolecules this plasma membrane or the cell membrane is made up of. Now let's come to the chemical nature of the plasma membrane or the cell membrane. So from your textbook again, so this study shows that the cell membrane is mainly composed of lipids and proteins. That means the chemical composition of the plasma membrane, it is mainly made up of lipids and proteins. And here the major lipids are phospholipids that are arranged in a bilayer. So here the major lipids, that is a conjugate lipid which is called as the phospholipid, where the lipid molecule, they have the phosphate group, and such type of lipids, it is called as phospholipid. And this phospholipid, it is phospholipids, they are arranged in two layers opposite to each other. Therefore, this is called as the bilayer. So the plasma membrane, it is made up of phospholipid bilayer. Also, the lipids are arranged within the membrane with a polar head towards the outer side and a hydrophobic tail towards the inner side. So here, as you can see in the diagram, that there is a polar head and there is a non-polar head. So here the polar head, that will always face towards the outer side of this opposite layer of the phospholipid, and that is generally hydrophilic, while the non-polar end or non-polar head, that is always towards the inner side, and that is the hydrophobic end of the phospholipid bilayer. As you know that these lipids, they are hydrophobic in nature. So this non-polar tail of the lipids or the saturated hydrocarbon, it is said saturated hydrocarbon because these lipids, they are made up of hydrocarbons only. So it is said that this ensures that the non-polar tail of the saturated hydrocarbon, that means lipid, it is protected from the aqueous environment. This is because that the lipids, they are already hydrophobic in nature. And in addition to phospholipid membrane, there is also another chemical which is called as the cholesterol. Later, it was also found that the cell membrane, it also comprises of carbohydrates. So the ratio of these proteins and the lipids varies considerably in different cell types of us, whether it is in the plant kingdom or it is in the animal kingdom. Say for example, in case of in human beings, the membrane of the erythrocyte, that is the red blood cells, has approximately 52% of protein and 40% of the lipids. And these proteins, it is also of two types, so it is classified into two types, and these are the integral and the peripheral protein. So peripheral protein, they will be lying on the surface of the membrane, and the integral protein, they will be of the part towards the inner side of the cell membrane. Now let's come to the molecular structure of the cell membrane. Currently, the fluid mosaic model for the molecular structure of the cell membrane is considered satisfactory. However, before this particular model, there were some other models which different scientists have proposed, such as that of the Daniel Davidson model, which was proposed in the year 1935 by James Danieli and Hugh Davidson. Then comes another very important model, that was Robertson model, which is also called as the sandwich model. So all these models, they were present there, but they had some drawbacks. But recently, in the year 1972, the fluid mosaic model was proposed by Jonathan Singer and Gert Nicolson. So they together, that means Singer and Nicolson, they proposed this fluid mosaic model for the molecular structure of the cell membrane. And according to this model, the biomembrane is not solid but viscous fluid, and the phospholipid and the protein molecules are arranged not uniformly but as a mosaic pattern. As they call this to be fluid, that means that the biomembrane, it is not a solid structure like that of the cell wall. So here it is a viscous fluid. That means it is slightly like the jelly like layer or a gel like layer. And here the term mosaic is used because here this phospholipids and the protein molecules which makes the structure of the cell membrane, they do not lie uniformly with each other as proposed by other two models. So here, as they are not uniform, therefore the term mosaic is applied here, and hence the name of the model became the fluid mosaic model. According to this fluid mosaic model, here the cell membrane, it consists of a highly viscous, that means fluid like or jelly like matrix of this phospholipid bilayer which lie opposite to each other, and along with this phospholipid bilayer there are globular proteins associated with them. And these globular proteins, they are found in two types, that is, one is called as the peripheral protein, which lie towards the surface of the cell towards the surface of the cell membrane. That means it lies outside the phospholipid layers on both the sides, and the intrinsic or integral proteins, and these, they lie towards the inner side of this phospholipid bilayer. So basically this arrangement, this is only called as the fluid mosaic model. and here a good amount of cholesterol is also present in the cell membrane of the animal cells. So here I hope you have understood about the fluid mosaic model that was proposed by Singer and Nicolson. That means the structure that we study now. So this particular structure, it is called as the fluid mosaic model, which was proposed by Singer and Nicolson in the year 1972. And because of the acceptance of this fluid mosaic model, so here we can say that the semi-permeable nature that this cell membrane shows, so that is relatable, and also the fluid content of the cell membrane that gives the elasticity to the cell membrane, and along with that it also helps in cellular growth, formation of intercellular junctions, different secretions can be done, cell divisions. So all these are part because of this fluid mosaic model. So hence this fluid mosaic model, it became one of the accepted models of the molecular structure of the cell membrane. Now let's come to the functions of the cell membrane. So cell membrane, it serves many functions. First function is that it maintains the individuality and form of a cell. That means like that of a cell wall, the cell membrane that also gives the form or shape and size to a cell and maintaining the individuality of a cell. Then comes the second function. It keeps the semi-fluid cell content in place and distinct from the environmental material. So it gives rigidity to a particular cell. It protects the cell from different injuries. It can be either a mechanical injury or it can be because of any kind of pathogen such as bacteria, virus, etc. Then comes that it regulates the flow of materials into and out of the cell. So it regulates the different materials that comes inside the cell or goes outside the cell, and therefore the cell membrane, it is called to be the selectively permeable or semi-permeable in nature. And this cell membrane, it also forms organelles within the cytoplasm. So we find different compartments or individual bodies which are called as the organelles within the protoplasm of a cell. So this cell membrane, it helps in forming such compartments or organelles which functions in different ways within the cell. So these are some very simple functions of the cell membrane. So here I'd like to elaborate the fourth point or the fourth function of the cell membrane according to the book that is given here. As it is said in the fourth point that the cell membrane, it regulates the flow of materials into and outside of the cell. So I hope that this particular point, it is clear to all of you, that it do not allow everything to go inside the cell or it to come outside the cell. So that is why we call the cell membrane to be a semi-permeable or selectively permeable layer of a cell. So according to the textbook, so it is also given the same way, but here it is said about two types of transport that takes place through this cell membrane. And here these are the passive transport, which is, you can call it to be the process of diffusion, and the another one which is called as the osmosis, which is also a special type of diffusion that takes place within the whole transport system. So let me read out this paragraph to all of you. So one of the important function of the plasma membrane is the transport of the molecules across it. The membrane is selectively permeable to some molecules present on either side of it. either the molecules they are coming inside from the outer part of the cell, or it is about to go outside from the inner part of the cell. So that is what it means here. So many molecules can move briefly across the membrane without any requirement of energy, and this is called as the passive transport. So some molecules there are there which can directly move inside the cell or which can directly come outside the cell, and such type of transport across the cell membrane, that is called as the passive transport. Along with that, the neutral solutes may move across the membrane by the process of simple diffusion along the concentration gradient, that is from higher concentration to the lower concentration. So here the transport it can take place with the solutes also. And what type of solutes are they? These are the neutral solutes. And this also takes place by the same process which we call it as the simple diffusion, where the flow of material it takes place from the region of higher concentration to the lower concentration. Water may also move across this membrane from higher concentration to lower concentration, and the movement of water by diffusion is called osmosis. So that is called as osmosis, which is a special type of diffusion where the semi-permeable membrane that is present there for the water molecule, and this whole phenomenon is called as the osmosis. So as the polar molecules cannot pass through the non-polar lipid bilayer, they require the carrier proteins of the membrane to facilitate their transport across the membrane. So here the carrier protein, these are the integral protein that is present with the phospholipid bilayer. So therefore it is said that the sum of the molecules they cannot pass through this non-polar end, and for that the carrier proteins that is required for them to go, and this whole transport that takes place with the help of this carrier protein, which are the integral protein. A few ions of the molecules are transported across the membrane against their concentration gradient. Now here some of the ions such as the chloride ion, potassium ion, so accordingly they are required for some special transport which requires energy, and it is said that they go against the concentration gradient, that is from the lower to the higher concentration. As it goes against the concentration gradient, so such a transport is an energy dependent process in which ATP is utilized, and it is called as the active transport. Example, the sodium and the potassium pump that is present in the cell membrane of our cells. So these are the few phenomena that is explained in the textbook which takes place during the transport of the different materials, and as this transport it takes place through the cell membrane, it undergoes all these types of phenomena such as facilitated transport, which we call it to be diffusion process, then comes osmosis, then comes the active transport. So all these phenomena are involved with this cell membrane. Now this cell membrane they also shows some kind of modifications, as for example the mesosomes that we found it in case of the bacteria. So these mesosomes they are the infolds of the cell membrane itself. So similarly we find vesicles. So these vesicles, these are also the modifications of the cell membrane. Then similarly there are some junctions or passages that occurs in between the cell membrane from one cell to another, and especially in case of the animal cell. So such kind of junctions or bridges, this is called as the cell junction, and sometimes there are also some gap junctions. So this is all about the molecular structure and the different functions of the cell membrane for today's video. Thank you.